The last part of minerals will be rather brief because we have a few that are critical and a few that I think I'm not going to emphasize nearly as much. Iron is definitely one that is important. We really have two sources. We have non-heme sources and heme sources. The heme sources are found in animals, and the non-heme are found in plants. They are better absorbed if they're consumed in an acidic environment or with vitamin C. So the iron is a trace, which means that we don't need a lot. Our RDA is a little bit higher for females and vegetarians compared to men. It's very important for oxygen transport and oxygen storage. It's the component of hemoglobin and myoglobin. If we look at where we get our good sources of iron, we're going to be looking at fortified foods. Here we have spinach, lentils, bagels, semi-sweet chocolate. Yay, semi-sweet chocolate. Kidney beans, chickpeas. When we look at our sources that are good, we're looking at some animal sources there and also some vegetables and greens. The important thing to look at here is that we have plenty of sources that are going to be very helpful if we pay attention and either eat fortified sources or have some cereals that are even Cheerios, but lentils, chickpeas, pretty good. The hemoglobin, which is on the left, has 4 subunits, and it is more of an oxygen transporter. So the iron is part of it's identified as the four dots in the hemoglobin, and it is more of it's what we find it's associated with red blood cells, and so it transports. The myoglobin has 1 subunit, and it's found in skeletal and cardiac muscles. It has a much greater affinity or grab. It holds on to oxygen much more tightly than hemoglobin, and so it is an oxygen storage component. It's not normally found in the blood, and if it is, it will be filtered through the kidney and excreted in the urine. It is very damaging to the kidney, and when we do find it in the blood, it's going to be associated with trauma, muscle trauma, and extreme damage to the muscle known as rhabdomyolysis, and that can cause renal failure. Deficiencies are common, and it's known as anemia. A person will experience anemia and great amount of fatigue. Toxicity is going to be problematic if a person has iron supplementation more likely than anything else. The real problem is the accumulation in the liver known as hemochromatosis, and that is going to be associated with liver damage or perhaps liver cancer. Athletes are at increased risk for iron deficiencies, most likely in women, particularly if the woman has heavy menstrual bleeding. They're at greatest risk. Younger athletes who have a higher requirement will be at increased risk. If an athlete is on a long-term or a very restrictive caloric diet, they are at greater risk. And also endurance athletes, they lose more iron through microscopic intestinal bleeding or tiny broken vessels in the soles of their feet. Individuals that have vegetarian diets might have a greater need for iron. So we have an increased demand for hemoglobin and myoglobin due to training and sport, and so it can look like someone has an anemia. There's also blood volume changes. If there's an increase in blood volume, it can appear that a person is anemic. So it's important to have the appropriate assessment. The mechanical hemolysis is the long endurance runner, as I mentioned, with a pound on the microscopic damage or bleeding. Zinc is a cofactor. You probably know of zinc when someone has a starting of a cold, and it can be taken in somewhat a big dose and help with immune function. It is got a very small need, 8 milligrams. We see that there's not a lot of high sources that might be accessible for athletes. Eating oysters on a regular basis might not happen. Alaskan king crab, not so often. Porterhouse steak. So those are some good sources of zinc. But we can see that we can have some wheat germ, refried beans, yogurt. Those are certainly dark meat of chicken, a good source. Rare to have deficiency or toxicity. As I mentioned, it can be associated with boosting the immune system, and so poor immunity would be one of the signs of deficiency, loss of appetite, and changes in the skin. There's really not an indication that supplements are needed because deficiencies and toxicity is typically rare. Chromium is associated more, initially it used to be thought that if you take it, it's going to be a fat burner. It has been found that it's more a function of decreasing insulin resistance and enhancing the function of insulin. So insufficiency could be associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. So here you see a number of minerals that are associated with potentially insulin resistance, and chromium increases insulin sensitivity, so it actually is helpful with warding off type 2 diabetes. So toxicity is rare. Small amounts are lost in the sweat and urine following strenuous exercise. If somebody is in a long-term, low-caloric diet for a long period of time, a small amount might be needed, a supplement might be needed, but there's not really a clear answer on that one either. Fluoride's important for your teeth, your bones, tendon strength. You can see some places where you can get it: brewed tea, grape juice, wine, beverage. Here you've got fluoride added to water. It's in a lot of our tap water, unless you live in an area where you have you don't drink treated water from a water treatment plant. So that would be more rural places. Or if you have why can't I think of the word? You have your own well water. That's what I'm thinking of. Deficiency would be fractures and a lot of teeth problems, dental problems. Supplements are not recommended. Copper is important. It's linked with iron metabolism. It does have an antioxidant cofactor component. We see that we've got it in nuts, mushrooms, and navy beans, peanuts, all bran cereal. So we're going to look at, if you eat legumes, which are those beans and peas, not green peas, but chickpeas. right? Those kinds of nuts and some seafood. Rare to get deficiencies, and supplements are not recommended. Wilson's disease, you may have heard of, that could be associated with animals and with individuals that have this inability to remove that copper, and it accumulates in the liver and causes disease. You have to have certain special food, and really this is with dogs, so that I've known Wilson's disease with dogs. Labradors most of the time, I think, retrievers. Manganese is an enzyme cofactor, and look, there's a very, very small amount needed. So we're looking at a couple cups of blackberries, which to me is pretty easy to do. A couple cooked spinach, brewed tea, baked beans, hazelnuts, oatmeal. If you have a cup of oatmeal, you almost have all of your all that's needed. For deficiency, it's going to be unlikely, perhaps poor growth, but most of the time supplements are not needed. It's relatively easy to get in a diet. Iodine, its main function is important with thyroid hormones, and here we have a very little problem with iodine any longer, because once it was determined that iodine wasn't in the soil, it was added to salt, and so we have really very few problems with it anymore. Deficiency, now here you have in toxicity, it can be associated with a goiter, cold intolerance, but here you have goiter is usually deficiency, but it also can be in toxicity. It is not recommended to have supplements. If you live in an area that it's typically added, if you use table salt or you salt any foods, highly unlikely that you have any problems with iodine. Molybdenum is for antioxidants and for metabolism of amino acids. That is very small RDA. Rare deficiencies, rare toxicities. Selenium is associated with, there are areas where the selenium is low in the soil, and in that case it might be needed to be added to animal feed. For human beings, we tend to have sufficient sources with spaghettis, with grains, with oatmeal. You'll see that tuna, canned tuna, has quite a bit. Here you have with rices, white bread, not very difficult to get that microgram level of selenium. Rare deficiencies, toxicity, that's a lot of selenium. It's not recommended to take selenium supplements because it's rarely deficient and it doesn't seem to have any benefit for performance. And there are other trace minerals that are identified: nickel, silicon, arsenic. Look at that. Not determined, no biological function. There are toxicities with some of these. And here are some more whether or not supplements are needed. And with these, there just is no justification for supplementation. The You Are the Nutrition Coach for Chapter 7 is a focus on an athlete who performed a half Ironman race who had some negative consequences. The entire race took 6.5 hours, and I looked to see what the average half Ironman lasts, and it's about 6 hours. It's 1.2 miles of swimming, followed by 56 miles of cycling, and running 13.1 miles. And she performed it in actually a really good time. However, she had quite a bit of discomfort on that last 13.1 mile run. it appears that she's got some problems with what her supplement is. Her sports beverage, it says that she has been consuming it, but when you look at how much she is consuming, it's primarily carbohydrate with some sodium, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And so when you look at what kind of potential cause of that nausea is, a quick calculation is that she had 12.5 servings of that beverage, all carbohydrate, and the only problem, she had equal amounts of sodium and potassium, which is great. Calcium, she's fine, but when you look at how much magnesium she consumed, the upper limit is 350 milligrams, and 30 milligrams of magnesium times 12.5 servings is 375. And so the upper limit, which is usually associated with supplementation, can cause nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and weakness, and that's what she experienced. She also had a couple gels in the bike portion, and depending on what kind of gel that she had, they're typically about 25 to 27 grams of carbohydrate. Depending on the gel, if you don't dilute it with plain water or drink some plain water with it, you can get cramps, nausea, and bloating. So that could be part of her issue as well. In that drink, there really isn't a need for calcium or magnesium, and so I would encourage her to change her supplemental beverage and make sure that she's using gels that don't require hydration. And the electrolytes should be the main issue, not magnesium. So changing her supplements would be critical. I'm also somewhat concerned that she changed to plain water, and there could be some dilution of her sodium as well. So there could be some hyponatremia that's going along with it. For the Chapter 6 vitamins, didn't look at that. We have an individual who is a hard worker, and he stays late, and he works hard, and he's busy, and he has little time to eat well. Food prep. He eats at the training table, but he either eats at home or local restaurants. So there's a couple issues going on with this athlete. A 3-day food record identified that he's not eating enough calories, and he's insufficient with some of his vitamins. A is fat soluble, but C and folate are going to be water soluble. And he's consistently low on those 3. Everything else seems to be pretty good. So what can you ask Roger about his typical daily diet? Well, you want to get an idea about what kind of frequency he eats of some of the nutrients of his fruits and vegetables. I would want to know if he had any snacks. I would ask him what kind of foods he also enjoys. That's really important. So once you get an idea about what his typical daily diet is, you can identify weaknesses or perhaps solutions of where food can be integrated into his day. He said he doesn't have very much time for meal planning, grocery shopping, and food preparation, but it's probably because he doesn't know how. So the recommendations to improve his dietary intake would be to do a question to find out what kind of foods that he likes with those nutrients, with A, C, and folate. So I would want to know what foods he enjoys. Does he like citrus fruit? Does he like oranges, yellow, orange peppers, spinach, broccoli, tomatoes? How often does he eat noodles, for enriched noodles? Sources of vitamin C like cantaloupe or strawberries. And if you consider what he likes, you can incorporate those into snacks. And if it can be something quick and easy to consume, then it's going to be more likely that to prepare, it's going to be more likely for him to be able to get those. So consider what he likes and try to incorporate into snacks. He also could probably add some denser caloric food in for snacks to get some calories, maybe identify some dairy, some yogurt or something with some nuts, granola that would fit with it. I would work with Roger to get a shopping list and to learn how to make a shopping list that's easy, that is focused on easy to prepare meals. I would also look with the common places. What tends to happen is people tend to eat at the same restaurants and they tend to eat the same things. Take a look at what kind of choices would be good choices when you look at the online menu, and look at how he can incorporate vegetables, grains, good grains, and help him make some choices. So then when he goes to that restaurant, he has an idea about what's going to be good for him to choose. And that will make that decision much easier. You can also work with him about the training tables in terms of how to fill up his plate, what kind of food he should have on half of his plate and on a quarter and a quarter, and focus on making sure that he gets those vitamins that he's missing, and also to get enough calories. That's also really important for him.